What is going on, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. Today, we're going to be talking about leveling order on all the Guardians. I think a lot of people misconstrue how important some abilities are to level or think abilities are good to level. In reality, they don't do that much. So we're just going to take a look at all the Guardians, leveling order, just talk about it all. And I hope you guys enjoy the video. So starting with Ares. Ares is a god where his base damage is kind of what carries him, and then his tankiness kind of comes in through items. When you play Ares, this is how you want to kind of level him. You want to get points into your chains. That's like your most important ability. Looking at his shackles, level 1 to level 2, his shackle damage almost doubles. So you don't fight level 1 with Ares. Don't fight level 2 with Ares. Level 3 is when you want to fight. Level 1 and 2, you just want to be farming the wave with your 3. You clear faster than most gods do. And then looking at his ult only goes up 75 damage every level. The difference between 200 and 500, 300 damage only is pretty negligible when you look at the fact that his 2 is going to be giving him twice as many protections, 30% CCR, HP 5. His 3 is doing percent health, and then extra damage per tick. His 1 is doing 105 god damage per tick. And it's crippling, and it's slowing him or them, and it's speeding him up. So his other base abilities just have a lot more in it than his ultimate. Going up 75 every point you put into it doesn't really change too much. You want to be getting points into your 2, your 1, and your 3. Artio is a funky god, I think, where you're kind of leveling matchup dependently. I think a lot of the times in support, you kind of have to max our 3 because you can't really get in there with your 1. It does feel bad now maxing the ability that goes down and cooldown a little bit, but you're kind of just forced into that. I think you want like 1 point into your ult just for the MP5 and the movement speed. But then after that, you want to get points into your 2. So you want to do something like this. You want to get points into all your abilities and then like this. And then I think you go max out here, point here, max out your 1, max out your 2, and then max out your ult. Looking at Athena, I think people get Athena's kit also messed up a little bit. Looking at her 2, you definitely want to get points into your 2, but I think getting a little extra damage into your 3 is kind of more important than just getting an extra small duration in your 2. Athena's ult also goes up 80 damage, so you're not getting anything else other than a little bit of damage in support on a god that you're sometimes not even getting, or like it's very hard to get your ult's damage onto somebody. So if you're playing Athena, her 3 and her 1 are our best 2 abilities, I think, to start. You want to get points into those, and then you want to get the taunt, obviously. I think putting a point into the 3 again to get a little extra base damage is her best. And then you put a point into Vendor Olympus, and then you start maxing out her 2, and then you start maxing out her 3. And then right here, she doesn't get really too much from either of these abilities. Depending on if your team can kind of use the damage from Defender of Olympus, you put points into it. But I usually just like doing this just for the extra base damage on the 1, because it's just a super low cooldown. It's a lot easier to proc it onto somebody. So Atlas is another one that I think is dependent on the game. He's got 3 really good abilities, and then his ult is insane. Let's just call it as it is. His ult is insane. You are putting points into this ultimate. It stacks more times the more points you put into the ult. The damage goes up, the focus damage goes up. So he does a lot of damage when he puts points into it. I like starting with his 3 and his 2. This gives you kill potential at level 1, level 2. You have a slow into a pickup, and then you obviously want to get a point into every ability. And then this is where it kind of switches up. How are you going to play around your character? I think a lot of the time maxing the 3 or the 2 is the best. Sometimes the 1 for the cooldown if you have to play safe, but this is usually what I like to do, just like this, putting points into ult when you can. That is how I prefer to max Atlas, but I do think he is very dependent, and every one of his abilities can be really good to max. Next up is Bacchus. He's got Chug, Belly Flop, Belch of the Gods, and Intoxicate. 4 very good abilities. Every ability gets a lot of good stuff into it. The 3 goes up in a lot of damage, you get extra stun. 2 goes up in damage, ult goes up in damage, and you get more power, and then your 1 is giving you a heal. Now, before this patch, you would never put a point into Chug until late game, but now, with how you want Breastplate of Regrowth, the healing item, you want to put a point into Chug around the time that you get that item. So, starting out with Belch and Belly Flop, and then putting a couple more points into each of these, Intoxicate, a couple more points into Belch, and then around like 8, 9, 10 is where we're going to be finishing Breastplate of Regrowth, and that's when you want to get your Chug. I don't know exactly, because it's going to change every game, but putting a point into Chug when you're finishing your Breastplate of Regrowth is going to be very good. Usually I like just maxing out the 1 and then starting to put points into the ult. It's probably just not going to change too much, but I think the extra 0.1 seconds is kind of relevant as opposed to the 10 power. Points into Belly Flop, Intoxicate when you can, and then start maxing out Chug because you have to. That's what Bacchus looks like. Cabrakan. Looking at Cabrakan, his 1 goes down in cooldown. His 2, you get extra stun duration. You get more protections. You get more damage. His 3, you get more damage, and it costs a lot more mana. And then his ult goes up in damage also. When I play Cabrakan and I max him out, I like maxing out the 2. I know some people like maxing out the 1 for the cooldown, but I think getting the protections on the 2 just makes you a lot more tanky, a lot harder to deal with. A lot of the times I like starting the 2, and then I go into the 1 and then the 3. Point into the 2, point into the ult. Point into the 2, point into the 2, and then point into the 1. I max his 1 and his 2 fully before putting a point into anything else. I think the ult 100 damage is good, but I think I'd rather have the cooldown on the 1 and then the prots on the 2. And then you want to get points into your ult because it's better than Tremors. Tremors stink now because he uses so much mana. And that's how I would max out Cabrakan. Next up, Cerberus. Cerberus gets stun duration and damage in his 1. In his 2, he gets damage, slow, protection reduction. His 3, he gets damage. The soul becomes tankier. He gets heals. He gets a heal per god. And then his ult is damage. I think with how his kit works now, his 2 does not reduce enough protections, I think, for it to be a relevant thing to want to max. The stun duration on the 1 is his most important thing. But I do think his 2 is still more important than his ult and his 3, and that is how I would max him. You don't really need the heal and support for his 3. The damage on his ult is pretty negligible, but getting your 1 maxed out for the stun, the 2 for the protection shred is how I would do Cerb. Cthulhu, we'll touch on him because I like playing Cthulhu support. I think it's fun. His 1 is a 10-second cooldown. The damage mitigation goes up when you get it stacked. He gets an attack speed slow, damage. His 2 goes down in cooldown, goes up in damage. His dash goes up in damage. His ult goes up in damage and duration. So his ult is something you want to get points into because it just makes you last in your ultimate longer. Putting points into the 1 and 3 so you can get on top of the ADC. Putting points into the 1 to make that attack speed reduced is the best thing because you can just walk to the enemy ADC and one them and then they're attacking for less attack speed. And you're making them do less damage to you also depending on how you have your passive stacked. So they're doing less damage to you and their attack speed is slowed. Putting points into the ult when you can on Cthulhu and not putting points into the dash because the dash is pretty irrelevant outside of the damage. That is how I like to max Cthulhu. Next up, Fafnir. Probably the easiest one to do. Pretty obvious also. 1 goes up in a lot of damage and goes down in cooldown. 2, you get attack speed buff, you get bonus damage, you get a self-heal. 3 is just damage. Ult is duration. So kind of the same thing as Cthulhu. Points into the 1, 3. Point into the 2 for the small heal and then just a little bit of attack speed. Max out the 1 and max out the ult when you can. The ult's very, very noticeable when you don't have another point into it. So you want to get that point into the ult at level 9 as quick as you can. Because the difference between 20 seconds and 25 seconds is almost 2 rotations of abilities depending on your cooldown. So very, very good. Ganesh should be another pretty obvious one. His 1 goes up in damage, down in cooldown. His 2 goes down in cooldown and up in protections. His dash goes down in cooldown. And his ultimate goes up in protection and damage. His ult is actually on a 75-second cooldown, which is really nice. You want to start by getting points into your 1-3, your safety, your damage for clear. Ohm is very good at level 3 because it gives you a good amount of protections and it also can interrupt abilities. Max out the 1 and the ultimate. Next up, you want to go Ohm, remove obstacles. Even though it goes down in cooldown is not that relevant compared to everything else. I like maxing out my 1 before putting another point in my ult. It doesn't really change too much here, but I think the little extra damage and damage increase is nicer than the damage from the ult. Max out Ohm. Next, putting points into Dharmic Pillars when you can, and doing remove obstacles last. Next up, Geb. Rollo goes down in cooldown, up in damage, and up in slow duration. 2 goes up in damage. 3, the shield health goes up, the shield duration goes up, the ult, the damage goes up, and the stun duration goes up. So Geb, I think, is somewhat dependent on the game you're in. Points into Shockwave and Rollout, I think at level 1 and level 2 can be very good, but sometimes you're going to have to go Stone Shield with Shockwave because you need to keep either your ADC alive or you alive. Usually it's your ADC. And then a point into Rollout. I like putting a point into Shockwave here, point into Cataclysm, point into Shockwave again, and then start maxing out Stone Shield with Cataclysm. This is just how I like to do it. I think it feels the best for Geb. I think it makes him feel the most relevant because his Stone Shield scales off of levels too. Plus at 15 per God's level, the health. So I think it's really good to play to get a little bit of base damage on your 2 and then put points into your 3. Khepri, this has been talked about a lot, how you level Khepri. Khepri's 1 goes up in damage, pull duration, protections. His 2, one of the best abilities in the entire game. Max this bad boy out. His 3 goes up in root duration and damage. And then his ult goes up in revived health and movement speed. How I like to max Khepri, I like doing it with maxing out Rising Dawn. They went through a phase where people were maxing 3 and I hated that. I hated that with Khepri. But I understand kind of why they did it. Point into Rising Dawn as quick as you can. Point into Abduct here, Rising Dawn. I like putting a second point into his ult just for a little bit extra movement speed and health. And then I like maxing out the base abilities like that. I max out the dash before the 3 because I would rather have the protections here than the extra 55 damage and the extra 0.1 seconds in cooldown. That's why I max the dash. I know some people don't like maxing the dash because they like keeping it as kind of like they're not using it really to engage as much. They'd rather play up with their dash and they'd rather dash away. I mean, with their 3 and dash away. But I like putting points into his 1. Kumba, still terrible, but he does have a cripple now. Throwback goes down in cooldown and damage. 2 goes up in cooldown, or goes up in damage. His 3, the Mez duration goes up and the attack speed debuff goes up. And then it's all just goes up in damage. How I like maxing Kumba is I like getting a point into the 2 early game and then the 1 for damage and clear and safety. And then you want to get a point into your 3rd ability. Putting points into Groggy Strike when you can, a point into ult. I don't like putting points into Kumba ult because it's only damage. I'd rather get his 1 or his 2 and his 3 maxed out. I think his 3 and his 2 are his 2 best abilities. And then you can start maxing out his ultimate just like that. Next up, Kuzenbo. I'm still trying to figure out how I like maxing Kuzenbo. His 1's damage goes up. The Kappa's health goes up too. His 2, you get cooldown per hit every time you take damage. His 3, you get a little extra damage up. And then his ult, you get a lot of damage up. It's always felt weird putting points into shell spikes because you're not returning any damage. But I look at it as more you're getting cooldowns up quicker. And I think it's actually really strong to like kind of level his abilities pretty evenly. His 1 and his 3 is best 1 and 2, clearly. Point into the 2 just for some cooldown resets. And then I like putting a point into either the 1 or the 3 here. Sometimes I go 1, sometimes I go 3. We'll do 3 for this one because I think it's a little bit easier to use. You want to put points into your ult kind of when you can. And then I kind of like leveling like this, where it's just everything pretty even. Because all of his abilities are very, very strong with points into them. If you get points into your 2, your ability is going to be up faster. The base damage on your 1 and 3 allows you to kill a lot easier. And then your ult is a lot of damage. But that's how I like leveling Kuzenbo. Maui should be a pretty easy one. His 1 goes up in damage, down in cooldown. His 2 goes up in protections, movement speed, and down in cooldown. 3 goes up in damage and stun. And then his ult just goes up in damage. I like putting no points into Maui's ult because it's, or 1 point into Maui's ult because it's only damage. And the rest of his abilities actually get a lot of value from putting points into it. So at level 1, you put a point into the 3, and then you go the 1, and then you go the Mystical Alua, because it is very, very strong early game with the protections and movement speed. Max out the 1 with points into the 2 when you have to start putting points into a different ability. Points into the 3 here, and then the ult last. That's how I like maxing out Maui. Next up, Sobek. Charge Prey goes up in damage. His Tail Whip goes up in damage. His Sickening Strike goes up in damage and heal. And then his ult goes up in damage and slow. And that's literally it. He's got a super simple kit. Charge Prey and Sickening Strike first 2, and then Tail Whip, points into every ability. Start getting points into the 3 to get a bigger heal, so you can threaten a little bit more. Points into your ult when you can, because the rest of his abilities are really poor base abilities. They don't really scale too much. I think that'd be a nice buff for Sobek, is giving his 1, 2, or 3 something else here. Like maybe giving his 1 like a prot shred after he plucks someone. I think that'd be pretty cool. Sylvanus. So you're going to see people that have different opinions on how to level Sylvanus, because some people think the 1, some people think the 2. I personally think his 1 down and cooldown, up in damage. His 2 protections, heal, and damage. His 3 down and cooldown, and his ult up in damage. How I've always liked to level Sylvanus is point into the 1, 3 early game, because usually you have enough pressure here that you want the CC. Get a point into your 2, obviously. I like doing the 1. I prefer the Fraud Shred. I prefer the cooldown. I think it is more relevant than the Wisps healing in the early game, but I still will do Wisps maxed out second. And then this is a personal thing. I think I like maxing Nature's Grasp before Wrath of Terra, because I prefer to have the 3 go down in cooldown so I can threaten a lot more than this extra 15 damage, or sorry, 75 damage at every level. Next up, Terra. Terra, a pretty consistent one with how you level her. The 1 just goes up in damage. The 2, you get extra damage. The 3 goes up in heal and damage. The ult goes up in healing and damage. If it's not known by now, Terra's got one of the best ultimates in the game. Getting points into it is OP. Points into the 2, 3 early game. It gives her a lot of damage, a lot of kill potential, a lot of threat on the enemy. And then you put a point into your 1 and then a 2 again. Put points into your ult when you can. Points into Monolith after maxing out Crushing Earth, because it's just giving you bigger heals. And then max your dash when you kind of forced into it. That's how you max out Terra. Next up, Xing Tian. Another one that should be pretty obvious. His 1 goes up in damage. The dot damage goes up by 1%. The damage reduction on auto attacks also goes up. The 2, the axe, slam, and root damage goes up. The 3's damage goes up, and the protections go up, and then the ultimate damage goes up. With Xing Tian, I like maxing out the 1 like this early game. Sometimes you aren't able to get your 1. You need to get your dash and your hook slam for the CC. But I think level 1, his best clearing option is Sky Cutting Axe. I think Furious Roar or Hook Slam is your next ability. Sometimes Hook Slam, sometimes Furious Roar, but I'm going to do it like this. Furious Roar, then you put 2 points into, because you want to get that enemy ADCs or enemy whoever you're wanting. You want to get their attack damage down. Whirlwind of Rage and Steel here. Max out the 1. Get the extra root duration on the Hook Slam, and then start maxing out the ultimate and and Sky Cutting Axe like that. Next up, Yemoja. She's one that changes nearly every game how you're going to want to max her. 1, the damage goes up. 2, your damage and your shield heal goes up. Not really a damage ability, but 3, you get movement speed and protections, and then alt, you get damage, and that is it. With Yemoja, a lot of the times, you're going to be going 1, 3, 1. The 2 at level 2, or the 2 at level 1 is pretty irrelevant, but you do eventually want to put a point into it. But the damage from the bouncing bubble is usually one of your best options. This should stay pretty consistent, but then after this, it kind of breaks off with just how do you want to play the game. Do you want to permanently heal your team, max out Mending Waters? Do you need to be able to run away from the enemy? Riptide is very good. Do you want to be able to hard carry and do damage? Bouncing Bubble is very good. For the sake of what I do more likely, I put points of Bouncing Bubble and Mending Waters first and second, and then I max out Riptide and River's Rebuke last. And lastly, Ymir, another one that somewhat changes depending on the game. This is bugged. This is incorrect. They nerfed this. I think it's a 13-second base cooldown, and it lasts 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, or maybe it's 2.5 up to 4.5, but this is just wrong. It just feels bad doing this on Ymir. His 1 is supposed to be base cooldown here, but the lifetime of the wall goes up. His 2 is damage. His 3 is damage and stun duration. His alt is a lot of damage and cooldown. I like maxing out a Ymir with getting a point into every ability. Obviously, you're doing the 2 at level 1. It's a lot of damage, a lot of threat. You're going into Frost Breath, and then usually wall here is very strong. I like getting a second point into Glacial Strike a lot of the times in ranked, just because I want to do that little bit extra damage. Shards of Ice whenever you can a lot of the time, because that damage and cooldown is really relevant. And then I start maxing out the wall, Shards of Ice, wall, Frost Breath, Shards of Ice, Glacial Strike, just like that. That's how I like maxing out Ymir. Sometimes I'll max out my 2 if I want to hard carry the game, but this is usually what I do. But there it is. That is how I level the Guardian abilities. Like I said, a lot of these Guardians ultimates do not need to be leveled. They go up by a little bit of damage, and they're a bait putting points into it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.